The bell above the cafe door chimed, and every pair of eyes in the room seemed to flinch at the sound. It was the same reaction every morning at precisely 8:02 a.m., as if the door wasn't just letting in air from the street, but a storm cloud made of sharp edges. Customers sipped their coffee faster. A barista's smile faltered. The manager straightened his tie in nervous habit. The sound of polished leather shoes echoed on the worn wooden floor, deliberate and slow, as though the man walking in owned not just the cafe, but every heartbeat in it. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a suit so perfectly cut it made the dim light dance. His watch could probably pay the rent for everyone in the building for a year, but it was his expression that drew the most attention, or rather, the lack of it. His eyes were cold, like winter glass, and his mouth seemed carved into a permanent line of disapproval. Everyone knew his name, though no one said it aloud unless they had to. Victor Langston, millionaire businessman, investor, and, to this cafe, a daily ordeal. Victor didn't just order coffee. He dissected it. If it was too hot, the barista was incompetent. If it was too cold, it was disrespect. If the foam wasn't exactly as he liked it, he would make a speech about standards loud enough for everyone to hear. And he always found something wrong. No one dared to challenge him, not after the time he'd gotten an employee fired just for rolling her eyes. The whole place seemed to shrink when he entered. On this particular morning, though, there was one new person who hadn't yet learned to shrink. She was behind the counter, hair tied up in a messy bun, wearing the crisp uniform that still smelled faintly of new fabric. Her name tag read Clara. It was her first week, and she'd taken the job because she needed it badly, so badly she'd promised herself she'd smile through anything. Victor walked straight to the counter. Double cappuccino. 1 shot extra. Foam exactly half an inch thick. Cinnamon sprinkled after pouring, not before. And don't make it too hot. Last time it was boiling, utterly unacceptable. He didn't look at Clara when he spoke, just at the space above her head. Clara smiled anyway. Got it. Double cappuccino, extra shot, perfect foam, cinnamon after pouring, and warm, not hot. Victor finally met her eyes, and for a second, she saw something flicker there, something like surprise, but it was gone before she could name it. We'll see if you can manage it. Behind her, the other staff exchanged pitying glances. Newbies always started the same way, bright, confident, but after a few encounters with Victor, they joined the rest in just surviving his visits. Clara made the cappuccino with care, her hands steady even when she felt his gaze on her like a weight. She measured the foam with the precision of a jeweler. The cinnamon fell in a light dusting, exactly as he wanted. She slid the cup across with a cheerful, "Here you go." Victor took one sip. His jaw tightened. "Too much cinnamon," he said, setting the cup down like it offended him. Clara's smile thinned but held. "I can make another." "I don't have time for another," he cut in. "If you can't follow instructions exactly, perhaps you should look for work somewhere less demanding." The cafe went silent. Everyone had seen this scene before. This was usually where the employee stammered an apology, and Victor left with his aura of superiority intact. But Clara didn't stammer. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Sir, I followed your instructions exactly. If the cinnamon is still too much for you, maybe it's not the coffee that's the problem." Victor froze. His eyes narrowed. No one had ever spoken to him like that here, not without regret. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and she braced for the explosion. It didn't come. Instead, he took another sip, eyes still locked on hers, and said nothing. He paid and left, the bell chiming in his wake. The cafe exhaled all at once. Clara's manager hissed, "Are you insane? That's Victor Langston." I know who he is," Clara said, turning back to the espresso machine. "And I'm not here to be anyone's punching bag." The staff whispered about it for the rest of the day. Some thought she was reckless. Others admired her. But no one expected what happened the next morning. At 8:02, the bell chimed. Victor walked in. This time, though, instead of scanning the room for flaws, his gaze went straight to Clara. He ordered the same thing, word for word. And when she brought it over, he sipped and didn't complain. He didn't compliment her either, but his silence was a victory in itself. Over the next week, a strange pattern emerged. He still arrived at the same time, still ordered the same drink, but the sharp edges of his words dulled. He never smiled, but he stopped cutting people down. And once, Clara caught him lingering by the window, staring out at the street with an expression that wasn't cold at all, but almost tired. One afternoon, when the cafe was nearly empty, he came in hours earlier than usual. His suit jacket was missing, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a weariness in his posture she'd never seen. He sat at the counter instead of his usual corner table. "Coffee." "Black," he said, voice low. Clara poured it without comment, but after a moment, she asked, "Rough day?" He glanced at her. "Rough year." The word surprised her, but she didn't press. Instead, she set the coffee down gently and said, "On the house." He frowned. "I can pay. I know you can. But sometimes, people don't need to. Sometimes they just need a little kindness." For the first time, his mouth curved, barely, but it was there. "You're a strange waitress. And you're a strange customer," she replied lightly. That tiny exchange cracked something open. Over the next month, Victor began speaking more. Little pieces of himself slipped out. How he'd built his business from nothing. How people constantly pretended around him. How he'd lost someone years ago and never really stopped being angry about it. Clara listened without judgment, offering neither pity nor awe, just the same steady presence. And then came the day the cafe door burst open, not at 8:02 a.m., but late at night, near closing, and Victor stumbled in, rain-soaked and shaken. His voice trembled when he said, "I need somewhere to sit." Clara made him tea this time. No coffee, no cinnamon, no perfection, just warmth. He sat there for hours, barely speaking, until finally, he said quietly, "You're the first person in years who's spoken to me like I'm human." She reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. "That's because you are." From that night on, something in Victor shifted. The next morning, he tipped the barista who made his coffee, generously. He thanked the busboy. He even laughed, once, at something a customer said. The cafe, once tense at his arrival, now watched in quiet amazement as the rude millionaire became, not exactly soft, but certainly kinder. Months later, Victor confided in Clara that he'd been carrying grief like a shield ever since his wife died. The anger had been easier than the pain. But somehow, in this little cafe, with a waitress who refused to be afraid of him, he'd begun to let go. And one ordinary morning, at 8:02 a.m., the bell chimed. And instead of silence, the cafe was full of chatter, music, and the smell of fresh pastries. Victor walked in, smiled at Clara, and said, "Surprise me today." She did. And so did he. When he left a check on the counter not for the price of coffee, but for enough money to renovate the cafe, upgrade the equipment, and give the staff a raise. No one feared him anymore. They respected him. And it all started because one new waitress had dared to stand up to a man everyone else had tiptoed around, and had chosen, instead of fear, a little humanity.